Everyone. Hello, everyone. I am Paul Westbrook, Brantford's film enthusiast, and wishing you all a happy Halloween, because this is our Halloween edition of Cinema Picks of the Week. And today I'm going to be dealing with horror anthologies. Yes, most of them are like TV shows, but they have the elements of horror and telling horror stories, so we're going to be discussing those today. And I want to start with the very first one, which is probably the most famous horror anthology of all, The Twilight Zone. Yes, hosted by Rod Serling. And we have all 156 episodes on these discs, which equate out to 25 discs. And each of them all have the various episodes of The Twilight Zone. And when it first came out, it was very popular, immensely popular. And you have a number of stars on here, and I'd like to read some of the stars that actually appeared on the show. William Shatner, Art Carney, Dennis Hopper, Burgess Meredith, Robert Duvall, Jack Klugman, Martin Landau, Roddy McDowell, Ted Knight, Ron Howard, Claude Akins, Burt Reynolds, Bill Bixby, Leonard Nimoy, James Best, Charles Bronson, Jackie Cooper, Kelly Savalas, George Takei, Carol Burnett. Yes, she was in one of these too. And Buddy Ebsen, Bill Mumy, who was Will Robinson on the Lost in Space series. Agnes Moorehead, she was from Bewitched. And Robert Redford was actually in one of the episodes. James Colbert and Lee Marvin, just to name a few. But yeah, The Twilight Zone were like usually a half hour, an hour program where they would feature a story and where the person would go through some strange occurrence or another, and it would actually have a twist conclusion at the end. So you got to see your favorite star in a predicament that you had to figure out what was going on in the story. But Twilight Zone, for its time, was immensely popular. Everybody that I know actually had seen this and really enjoyed it. And it had bits of horror, but also it's science fiction fantasy. But I'm including it in today's presentation. You know, there were a few that actually dealt with ghosts and very spooky occurrences. And most of the films were like spooky in their own way, but at the same time, as you get along into the story, you had to think it over, think about what was happening and how it would resolve. And it would always catch me by off guard when I first saw it. So I absolutely loved it. And Twilight Zone was the first one that I was familiar with. But believe it or not, there was a series that came out before Twilight Zone. And I'm going to show you what it was here. The precursor to Twilight Zone was called One Step Beyond. And the host was John Ireland. And the difference between this one and the Twilight Zone is that, well, Twilight Zone, they both mostly wrote fictional scripts based on, just made up their own stories. These are based on actual cases, like stuff that has actually may or may not have happened in that. And you get at least, on this one, 50 complete episodes of the series. But it was formatted a lot like The Twilight Zone in the fact that you had to tell stories. They told different stories and different experiences. And in this case, yes, it was something that was all completely different and yet familiar at the same time. I don't know, have you seen this one before, Seth?
Don't think so.
But yeah, Twilight Zone was great, and then this one, I thought it to be a little spookier in the way, just some of the music that they used that they didn't use in the Twilight Zone, they would use for this one. But if you like Twilight Zone, and you could find this series on Amazon or at a store, I suggest you would pick it up and see for yourself. The third one here was a series that took place after the Twilight Zone was done. Rod Serling had finished doing Twilight Zone and looking for new scripts to write, because he wrote a lot of the episodes of the Twilight Zone. I believe except the last few seasons, or 2 seasons, I think, he didn't really write them, but he wrote most of them. But anyway, when he was done writing The Twilight Zone, he wrote a series called Night Gallery. Now, this one here, it has 98 stories. You know, over encompassing all the different seasons. And it lasted 3 seasons, and it was like when Rod Serling was done, Twilight Zone, he went on to do this series. Usually in a dimly lit art gallery, you see pictures, and what would happen is all the different pictures would pertain to what the story was that night. And you looked at the paint. Usually they were paintings. He would watch the paintings, and then whatever painting he would talk about it and talk a little about the history of the painting, and then go into the story that dealt with the painting, and then he would go from there. Hey, Thomas, how you doing? Yeah, and I like this a little more, just a little bit more, because this one dealt more into the horror elements than Twilight Zone did. Like, while Twilight Zone was more fantasy and sci-fi and horror, this one was like almost straight horror, because you had different horror stories, and each one was very spooky, and it also featured many different guest stars. You had Diane Keaton in this one, Joan Crawford, Sally Field, Mickey Rooney, and more. And some of the episodes are directed by Steven Spielberg, which it says on here. So, yeah, if you like The Twilight Zone and you also like the One Step Beyond, this is more of a 70s retelling of the anthology series. And maybe someday they might decide to reboot it or revamp it or whatnot. But yeah, if you've never seen Night Gallery, I don't think you have, or this or that.
Not that I know of.
But it's certainly a really good series, and one I would suggest take a look at. And now the next one here was, believe it or not, a Canadian series. We actually, yes, Canada has its own anthology series. It's The Hitchhiker. And it was on HBO. It was featured on HBO for a lot of years. I remember seeing it on pay TV. The Hitchhiker, as played by actor Paige Fletcher. It says, walking a lonely road where darkness is always by his side and terror lurks around every turn. Pick him up if you dare. He will guide you to your destination, where the good are spared and the wicked are damned. And like Night Gallery and like Twilight Zone, and even like One Step Beyond, you also have an all-star cast in this one. You have Kirstie Alley, Virginia Madsen, Jerry Orbach, Gene Simmons from KISS, Tom Stewart, Michael Madsen, Bill Paxton, Kelly Lynch, and Lauren Hutton. And again, it's like the anthology where something spooky would happen, and then you're trying to figure out what's going on, then the bad person would usually end up punished, and the good one would come to the inevitable conclusion of what had really happened. And yeah, we're pretty proud to say that having a good Canadian series is good. Oh, and there's some more guest stars in this one, like Gary Busey, Peter Coyote, Willem Dafoe, Helen Hunt, Margot Kidder, Joe Pantoliano, and James Remar. And each of the stars would play a specific character in the story that was set to occur. And by the end of the story, they'd either be known as the good person or the bad person. And I liked it myself. It's a bit lower budget than the other two, but it's still a really good series, and one that you would certainly want to watch and learn from. Well, learn how to do a spooky story with a low budget. Finally, we got Tales from the Dark Side, the complete series. Now this one took place, I think, in the early 80s. And again, it's an anthology one. You have your different guest stars. You have your various stories as each season goes on, and more of the same spooky type movies, same spooky type stuff that you would get in most of the films. You would get in a series like this, and you have various creatures that the characters have to deal with. And it certainly went through, not sure how many seasons it was actually. It doesn't know if it says it on here. Trying to guess about 4 or 5 seasons, or just a minute, I can check here. The final season was season 4. So it ran for 4 seasons, and at the same time, like the Twilight Zone, which Twilight Zone was actually rebooted in the 80s too, and then even in the early 90s, and not too long ago with director Jordan Peele, who did his own version of it. But I'm not sure if they ever did do Tales from the Dark Side yet. They might, who knows, in the future. But horror anthologies are good because you get different stories within a certain allotted time frame. And if you enjoy horror, you enjoy sci-fi, these type of shows are just what you might be looking for.
That's like Tales of the Crypt.
And Tales from the Crypt. You've seen that one?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen the 2 movies. I haven't really sat and watched Tales from the Crypt, but was it good? They recently did, well, they also did one called Are You Afraid of the Dark?
That's funny.
Which is a kids one. It's more the for the teen set. But it's the same type of idea. And as long as they're continuing to do anthology series, they can only come up with some more new plots, new stories. Yeah, plots. Where is it? Burial plots? No. They come up with new stories to keep their audiences captivated. They were doing that with movies too, like Vault of Horror and the Tales from the Crypt movie that they did, which I actually have at home. I think I have Vault of Horror at home somewhere. House That Dripped Blood, and the Hammer House of Horror, which were all the Hammer films. So yeah, anthology movies and shows continue to come out each year and all the time, so make sure you look for mine. Well, that's it for now, and thank you very much for listening. And remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Remember to leave a comment in the comment section, which is below the video here that you see. And I welcome your comments. They're good, bad, indifferent. As long as it's something that's positive and it can help maybe even improve the show, we can do that. But for now, it's Paul Westbrook saying Happy Halloween, and I'll be seeing you at the movies. Boo!